The train doors closed just 3 seconds before Nathan Cole reached the platform. He ran through the rain with one hand gripping his old leather bag, but it was too late. The train began moving, carrying away the only thing he thought he had left in his life, a chance to start over. Nathan stood frozen beneath the flickering station lights, breathing heavily as rainwater ran down his face. He had no idea that missing that train would change his life forever. He had no idea that, just a few minutes later, he would meet a woman who had spent 7 painful years searching for him. And the strangest part was this. She wasn't looking for the man Nathan had become. She was looking for the boy he used to be. If you believe that kindness can change a life, that second chances sometimes arrive when we least expect them, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. You never know when one small act of kindness might become someone else's reason to keep going. Nathan was 34 years old and lived in a small apartment in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where every room seemed to echo with memories he was trying to forget. He worked long shifts repairing heating systems, came home exhausted, ate whatever was cheap, and slept with the television playing because silence reminded him too much of the past. His mother had died when he was 21, his father had disappeared when he was young, and the woman he had once planned to marry had left him after years of watching him struggle to keep his life together. Nathan had learned not to expect much from people. Expectations, he believed, were simply another way of getting hurt. That rainy evening, he had packed everything he owned into one worn suitcase because he had finally accepted a job in Cleveland, Ohio. It wasn't his dream job, but it was steady work, better pay, and far enough away that he could convince himself he was beginning again. He had bought a train ticket and promised himself that once the train crossed the state line, he would stop looking backward. But the storm had other plans. A highway accident had blocked traffic, his rideshare had stopped several blocks from the station, and Nathan had spent the final minutes running through flooded streets. When he finally reached the platform, he saw his train already moving. He stopped. For several seconds, he simply watched the red lights disappear into the darkness. Then he lowered his head and laughed bitterly. It was the kind of laugh a person makes when life has become so ridiculous that crying seems pointless. He dragged his suitcase toward a bench and sat down beneath the station roof. His clothes were soaked. His phone was almost dead. His wallet contained barely enough money for dinner, and the next train wasn't until morning. Nathan leaned back and closed his eyes. Then he heard someone crying. At first, he ignored it. The station was nearly empty, and he assumed whoever it was wanted privacy. But the crying continued, soft and broken, coming from somewhere near the far end of the platform. Nathan looked up. A woman stood beside a metal column, holding an old photograph in both hands. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with long chestnut hair damp from the rain and a beige coat wrapped tightly around her. Her face was pale, and tears were running down her cheeks. Nathan watched for a moment before looking away. He had learned that sometimes people didn't need advice. Sometimes they simply needed someone to leave them alone. But then the woman dropped the photograph. The wind pushed it across the wet platform. Nathan instinctively stood and caught it before it disappeared beneath a bench. He bent down, picked it up, and walked toward her. The woman looked at him, and the moment their eyes met, something changed in her expression. She stopped breathing. Nathan held out the photograph, but she didn't take it. Instead, she stared at his face as though she had just seen a ghost. Nathan became uncomfortable and asked if she was all right. The woman finally reached for the photograph, but her hands were trembling so badly that she nearly dropped it again. Then she whispered that she had been searching for someone for 7 years. Nathan gave a confused smile and told her he was sorry, but he didn't know who she was looking for. She looked at him again. This time, there was fear in her eyes. She turned the photograph around. Nathan's heart stopped. It was a picture of a teenage boy standing beside an elderly woman in front of a small blue house. The boy was 17. He had messy dark hair, a crooked smile, and the same small scar above his right eyebrow that Nathan still carried. Nathan stared at the photograph. He knew that boy. He had spent half his life trying to forget him. It was him. But the woman wasn't finished. She pointed at the elderly woman standing beside the boy. Nathan's hands began to shake. It was his grandmother, Margaret. She had died years ago. Nathan looked at the woman holding the photograph and asked where she had gotten it. The woman swallowed hard and finally told him her name was Grace Bennett. She said she had met Nathan when they were teenagers. Not romantically, not dramatically, just two lonely kids who had happened to live in the same neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. Nathan barely remembered, but Grace remembered everything. She remembered how Nathan's grandmother used to leave extra food on the porch for neighborhood children. She remembered how Nathan would walk her home when older kids bullied her. She remembered one winter when Grace's mother lost her job and her family couldn't afford groceries. Nathan's grandmother had quietly brought them food for months. Nathan had helped. He had never told anyone. Grace said she had always wanted to thank him. But 7 years earlier, something terrible had happened. Grace's younger brother, Caleb, had disappeared. He had been struggling, angry, and lost, and one night he ran away. Before leaving, he had told Grace that Nathan was the only person who had ever made him feel like he mattered. Grace searched everywhere. She searched shelters, hospitals, police records, community centers, and bus stations. Eventually, she discovered that Nathan had left Ohio after his grandmother died. She spent years trying to find him, not because Caleb had ever told her where Nathan went, but because Nathan was the last person who had shown her brother genuine kindness. Grace believed that if she could find Nathan, perhaps she could understand where Caleb had gone. Nathan listened silently. Then he told her the truth. He remembered Caleb. He remembered the night Caleb had come to his grandmother's house. He remembered Caleb saying he wanted to leave town. And he remembered giving him $20 and an old backpack. Nathan had always assumed Caleb had gone somewhere safe. But there was something else. Nathan had received a letter from Caleb 3 weeks later. He had kept it for 7 years. The letter was inside an old box in his apartment. Nathan had forgotten about it until that moment. Grace's face changed when he told her. She asked what the letter said. Nathan looked down. He remembered every word. Caleb had written that he was heading west, and that he needed time to figure out who he was. He had thanked Nathan for believing in him when nobody else did. But the final sentence was what Nathan remembered most. Caleb had written that someday he wanted to come back and make things right with his sister. Nathan had never known what happened after that. Grace covered her mouth and began crying. For 7 years, she had believed her brother had simply disappeared. Now, for the first time, she had proof that he had been alive after he left. Nathan apologized for never telling anyone. Grace shook her head. She said Nathan had nothing to apologize for. Then she told him something that broke through the walls he had built around his heart. Caleb had been found 6 months earlier. Alive. He was living in Oregon under a different last name. He had contacted Grace after years of recovery and had finally told her the truth. He had been ashamed. He had struggled with addiction. He had spent years running from his family because he believed he had ruined everything. But he had never forgotten Nathan. Grace had come to Pittsburgh because Caleb had recently discovered an old photograph and remembered Nathan's full name. She had searched online, called old numbers, contacted former neighbors, and eventually learned that Nathan was leaving Pittsburgh for Cleveland that very night. She had arrived at the station hoping to find him. She had been waiting there for nearly 2 hours. Nathan looked at the tracks. The train he had missed was gone. For years, he had believed missing opportunities meant losing something forever. But now he wondered if sometimes a missed train was simply life forcing you to stop long enough to see something you would have otherwise passed by. Grace told him Caleb wanted to speak to him. Nathan wasn't sure he could. He was afraid of reopening old wounds. Afraid of discovering that the person Caleb remembered no longer existed. But Grace smiled through her tears and told him that maybe he didn't need to be the same person. Maybe it was enough that he had once been kind. Nathan sat beside her until sunrise. They talked about Margaret, about Caleb, about childhood, about mistakes, and about the strange ways people can disappear from one another's lives without ever truly disappearing from their memories. The next morning, Nathan didn't take the train to Cleveland. Instead, he called his new employer and asked for another start date. Then he called Grace, and together, they began searching for Caleb's flight schedule so Nathan could finally see the man he had once helped. 3 weeks later, Nathan stood inside a small Oregon airport. His heart pounded as a man walked toward him. Caleb was older now. His face carried the scars of difficult years, but his eyes were familiar. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Caleb hugged him. Nathan closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry. Caleb told him that the $20 and old backpack Nathan had given him had saved his life that night. He said he had carried the memory of Nathan's kindness through every terrible moment. Nathan shook his head and told him he hadn't done anything special. Caleb disagreed. He said sometimes one person believing in you is enough to keep you alive long enough to believe in yourself. Those words stayed with Nathan. Months later, Nathan never took the Cleveland job. Instead, he partnered with Grace to help people who were struggling to rebuild their lives. They started small, using an empty community building outside Pittsburgh. They provided warm meals, donated clothing, transportation assistance, and most importantly, a place where people could sit without being judged. Nathan eventually learned that his greatest gift had never been repairing heating systems. It had been repairing something far more fragile: hope. Years after that rainy night, Nathan returned to the same train station. He stood beneath the same lights and listened to the sound of another train approaching. Grace stood beside him. She smiled and asked whether he ever regretted missing that train. Nathan looked at the tracks and smiled. He said that once, he thought missing it had ruined his life. Now he understood that it had saved it. Because if he had boarded that train, he would never have met Grace. He would never have found Caleb. He would never have discovered that the kindness he thought nobody remembered had quietly traveled through 3 lives for years. And most importantly, he would never have learned that sometimes life doesn't give you what you planned for. Sometimes it gives you what you needed. If this story touched your heart, please support the video by liking it, sharing it with someone who needs hope, and subscribing to the channel. Your engagement helps these stories reach people who may be going through their own difficult season and need a reminder that their smallest act of kindness may matter more than they will ever know. And before we end, I want to ask you something special. Comment, "I believe in second chances," if you believe that one act of kindness can change a person's life. Because somewhere tonight, someone may feel forgotten. Someone may believe their mistakes have erased their future. Someone may be standing on a lonely platform, watching the last train disappear into the darkness, convinced that they have missed their only chance. But remember Nathan. He missed one train, and that missed train led him straight to the people who had been waiting years to tell him something he had forgotten about himself. He mattered. His kindness mattered. His past wasn't wasted. And neither is yours. Sometimes the door closes because you're not supposed to go through it. Sometimes the train leaves without you because there is another destination waiting. And sometimes, the greatest second chance of your life begins with what feels like your biggest disappointment. So if tonight you find yourself standing alone, wondering why life didn't go according to plan, don't give up. Take a breath. Look around. You may not have missed your chance. You may have simply arrived at the beginning of a story you haven't learned to love yet.